Okay, so this is it, the final installment of our three-part exploration into poltergeist phenomena,
That's right.
all viewed through the lens of Dr. Summer, the creator of Forbidden Histories. Now, if you've been with us, you'll remember last time we touched on some really intriguing figures, Camille Flammarion, Alfred Russel Wallace.
Hmm.
And we even left you with that, well, pretty surprising image of Marie Curie, right? Caught up in a seance.
Yeah, that definitely raises eyebrows.
Exactly. So today, our mission really is to unpack this. What actually compelled some of the absolute greatest scientific minds, we're talking late 19th, early 20th century, to meticulously investigate things like poltergeists. And, what did they really believe about them?
It's a great question.
Because I can tell you now, it's a world away from what popular culture might lead you to believe.
Welcome. And you've hit on such a key point there. It's really remarkable how often the historical context just gets, well, lost, doesn't it, when we look
Yeah.
back today? Our modern assumptions, they can really misrepresent the genuine motivations and the intellectual frameworks of these researchers. We're definitely going to uncover some surprises.
Okay, so let's dive in. When we see names like Marie Curie, or we hear about her husband Pierre Curie getting even more involved in these strange occurrences, it's so easy to jump to conclusions, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You might picture them as, I don't know, secret spiritualists looking for messages from beyond. But that idea doesn't really hold up once we understand the context, right? Especially for these continental European scientists. What's the biggest misconception?
Well, the biggest one is exactly that this idea they were trying to prove spirits or an afterlife existed. For many major European scientists, their, let's say, open-minded investigations were very rarely driven by any sympathy for spiritualism as a religious thing.
Okay.
And they weren't just dogmatic debunkers either. No, their goal was almost always to find natural explanations, not metaphysical ones.
Natural explanations for, well, things that looked supernatural.
Exactly. They saw these phenomena as maybe physical effects that science just didn't understand yet. And because of that, they were worthy of really rigorous investigation.
Right, right. And this brings us to someone who's almost completely forgotten today, but was apparently quite important back then. Julian Ochorovich,
Ah, yes.
Polish intellectual,
Yeah.
early 1900s. He had a doctorate in physiological psychology, known as an inventor, a philosopher, and a key figure in Polish positivism.
That's right. And positivism, just to clarify for everyone, is basically a philosophical stance that, strictly avoids metaphysical or spiritual explanations in science.
Keep it purely material, purely observable.
Pretty much. And historically, it often had a political edge, too, pushing back against religious influence in government and science. Ochorovich, being a top positivist in largely Catholic Poland, really championed these secular ideals. Science was the highest form of knowledge for him.
Okay, so here's the twist then.
Yeah, what makes him so interesting is that most other positivists would have run a mile from anything related to seances or poltergeists. They generally hated anything seen as a cult.
But Ochorovich didn't.
No, he dived right in. Even though it got him into, well, hot water with his fellow positivists, he thought these phenomena needed scientific study precisely because they were unexplained.
And he wasn't alone in this rather odd position, was he? He collaborated closely with Charles Richet.
Yes, Charles Richet, a huge name, French Nobel Prize winner in physiology.
Right, and Richet shared these unorthodox research interests and the positivist principles.
Absolutely. Richet was also foundational in studying hypnotism and the unconscious mind areas that, as you can imagine, often bumped up against these kinds of alleged occult phenomena.
So what was Richet's take? Was he secretly hoping for spirits?
Not at all. Quite the opposite. Richet was an outspoken atheist. He categorically rejected any spiritualist or metaphysical interpretation of the things he studied. He was absolutely firm. Science would eventually explain all these weird phenomena. No spirits needed.
He even invented the word ectoplasm, didn't he? That sounds pretty spooky.
He did. But, and this is crucial, for Richet, ectoplasm wasn't some spirit goo. He theorized it was a natural biological substance produced by the medium's body, just one science hadn't identified yet.
So again, a natural explanation?
Always. That's the key takeaway. Popular culture loves to paint these researchers as believers in spirits, but if you read their actual writings, their letters, they explicitly reject that. Their aim was always to expand the known laws of nature, not to prove an otherworldly realm.
Okay, so that takes us from France and Poland now over to Germany, right? With Albert von Schrenknotzing.
Yes, Schrenknotzing, the so-called ghost baron.
The ghost baron, yeah. Because he did a lot of experiments with mediums who specialized in materializations.
That's right. But again, it's so easy to get the wrong idea. Schrenck-Notzing had absolutely zero interest in proving spirits or an afterlife. He was famously skeptical.
To the point where mediums did want to work with him.
Exactly. His skepticism, his rigorous methods, they often made it hard to find mediums willing to undergo his scrutiny. His, let's say, non-spiritualist, even anti-spiritualist stance, and his very systematic approach really set the standard for this kind of research in German-speaking countries.
Okay, but here's where it gets really surprising for me. This wasn't just a few individuals on the fringes. You're saying this kind of investigation actually reached into the heart of mainstream science, like the Vienna Circle.
The Vienna Circle of Empirical Positivism, yes.
The guys who were all about logic, verifiable evidence, kicking metaphysics out of science completely. I remember them from another deep dive we did. This seems completely contradictory.
It is paradoxical, and honestly, modern scientists and philosophers are usually pretty shocked when they find this out. Despite their huge legacy in philosophy of science, key members, people like Hans Hahn, Rudolf Carnap, Moritz Schlick, they actually took reports of, well, things that go bump in the night surprisingly seriously.
Seriously, how?
They knew about Schrenck-Notzing's work, they discussed it, and some even got involved in investigating reported occult phenomena themselves.
Wow. Any specific names linked to this?
Definitely. Get this. Hans Hahn, a leading mathematician in the circle, was also the vice president of the Austrian Society for Psychical Research.
No way.
Yes way. And the president of that same society, Hans Thüring, a well-known professor of theoretical physics, a personal friend of Einstein, famous quantum theorist.
So top-tier physicists and mathematicians.
Absolutely elite scientists. And Thüring, like the others, was fiercely anti-spiritualist. He'd often publicly complain when journalists misrepresented their research as trying to prove spirits. They were adamant it was about unexplained physics or psychology.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Give us a case they actually looked into.
A really famous one they both investigated was Eleanor Zugan.
Eleanor Zugan, okay.
She was an illiterate peasant girl from a village in Romania. Her problems started around age 11. This was the mid-1920s.
And what kind of problems? Classic poltergeist stuff.
Textbook poltergeist activity, yes. Objects moving on their own, rocks apparently being thrown from nowhere. And the really disturbing part, scratches and even bite marks suddenly appearing on her skin.
Appearing and disappearing.
Appearing and disappearing, yeah. Mostly on her hands, arms, face, neck. Just suddenly there, then gone.
What did she think was happening?
Well, given her background, her family's Orthodox Christian beliefs, Eleanor herself thought she was possessed or attacked by the devil.
Okay.
Eventually, she was brought to Vienna by a Countess Zoe Wasilko, who was prominent in that Austrian Society for Psychical Research. The Countess housed her, put her under constant observation.
And Hahn and Thüring observed her there.
They were among several prominent intellectuals who did, yes, under these controlled conditions. They also tried to get her used to more experimental setups, things that looked a bit like spiritualist seances.
My seances. Weren't they anti-spiritualist?
It's a good point. But remember, many famous physical mediums people studied in seance settings had actually started out as poltergeist cases. There was seen to be a link between spontaneous phenomena and what could sometimes be elicited, supposedly under controlled experimental seance-like conditions.
I see. And what about those marks, the scratches and bites?
This is where it gets really interesting psychologically. Countess Wasilka reported that she could actually use hypnosis on Eleanor to reproduce those same uncanny marks, more or less at will, just through hypnotic suggestion.
Wow. So not the devil then?
That was the point. To show Eleanor and the investigators that these weren't external attacks. They were somehow responses generated by her own unconscious mind, likely linked to emotional stress, maybe unresolved psychological issues.
How radical was that idea back then, connecting physical marks directly to the unconscious mind?
Oh, it was very radical for the time. And this connects us to psychoanalysis. Alfred Winterstein, a prominent psychoanalyst in Vienna, part of Freud's inner circle.
Freud knew about this.
Well, Winterstein investigated Eleanor Zugan, too, and he actually wrote an article about the psychoanalysis of spook in German, in Freud's own journal, Imago.
The psychoanalysis of spook.
Yeah.
So what was the theory? How did they explain poltergeists psychoanalytically?
Schrenck-Notzing put it quite well. He wrote something like, Emotionally charged complexes of representations seem to press for discharge and realization through haunting phenomena. Hence, the so-called haunting occurs in place of a neurosis.
Okay, unpack that a little. In place of a neurosis.
Yeah. So the idea is you have these painful experiences or deep emotional conflicts that get repressed, pushed down into the unconscious,
Right.
but they don't just disappear, they fester. And according to this view, instead of manifesting as, say, anxiety or depression, a typical neurosis, these unresolved conflicts could, in very rare individuals, discharge outwardly as physical phenomena, poltergeist activity.
And the German word spoke covered both poltergeists around a person and hauntings tied to a place.
It did, yeah. But these researchers, like Schrenk-Notzing, Winterstein, they were mostly focused on the person-centered stuff, the poltergeist phenomena.
So the physical marks on Eleanor's skin,
Ugh.
they saw that like a psychosomatic symptom, like getting a rash from stress.
Exactly like that. That's the core idea, which we now readily accept in psychosomatic medicine. Mental stress causes physical symptoms. But they took it a step further, didn't they?
A huge step further.
Right. The truly radical part was proposing that not just skin marks, but objects moving, things being thrown. That was also the unconscious mind acting out emotional conflicts. But only, they theorized, in individuals who had some kind of, well, exceptionally rare telekinetic disposition.
Ah, the Carrie connection.
Precisely. That trope you see in fiction, like Stephen King's Carrie. The stress triggers these uncontrollable powers, often unconsciously at first. That's basically the psychodynamic model they were building.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift slightly. Another big name enters the picture here. Eugen Bleuler.
Yes, the Swiss psychiatrist famous for coining the term schizophrenia.
Right. And Bleuler, despite being a materialist himself, he supported Schrenk-Notzing's controversial work.
He did. He even encouraged a biologist, Fanny Moser, to compile a huge classic German book on hauntings and poltergeists, taking the phenomena seriously.
And Bleuler connects to Carl Jung.
Directly. Bleuler was Jung's mentor and, for a time, his boss.
Ah, okay. And Jung, obviously huge in psychology, famously split with Freud. Did this kind of phenomenon play a role?
It was one of the key reasons, yes. They had fundamental disagreements about how relevant occult phenomena were for understanding the unconscious mind.
But Jung wasn't a spiritualist either in this context.
Despite his later, more mystical leanings, no. When it came to things like poltergeists, Jung, like the others we've discussed, also rejected simple spiritualist interpretations. He initially adopted a similar psychodynamic framework, thinking along the lines of Schrenk-Notzing and Winterstein, unconscious complexes manifesting externally.
But Jung took it somewhere else later, didn't he? Especially in his collaboration with Wolfgang Pauli.
He did indeed. Wolfgang Pauli, Austrian Nobel Prize winner in physics. Seems like an odd couple, right? A physicist and a depth psychologist.
Definitely an unexpected pairing. What came out of that?
Their joint book, The Interpretation of Nature and the Psyche, and this is where Jung really elaborated his famous idea of synchronicity.
Meaningful coincidences.
Exactly. Strikingly meaningful coincidences. Jung drew on some, well, early modern occult philosophy, but also tried to connect it to interpretations of quantum mechanics. He proposed that mind and matter weren't totally separate.
Oh, so.
He believed they were intrinsically connected at some very fundamental metaphysical level, sort of outside of our usual understanding of space, time, and causality. So synchronicities for Jung weren't just random chance.
They were.
They were non-causal manifestations. Psychological issues or complexes could somehow represent themselves non-causally in the physical world.
Can you give an example? He had a famous one, right?
The scarab beetle, yes. He tells the story of a patient who was stuck in her therapy, very rational, and she'd been dreaming about receiving a golden scarab. While she was telling Jung the dream,
Yeah.
a beetle, a Cetonia aurata, which looks quite like a scarab, apparently started tapping repeatedly against the outside of the consulting room window. Jung caught it, showed it to her, and said, "Here is your scarab." He claimed this uncanny event broke through her rational defenses and was key to her progress. That's synchronicity for Jung.
Okay. And what was Pauli's contribution to this book, The Physicist?
Paul's essay was actually a historical deep dive. He reconstructed an intellectual debate between the astronomer Johannes Kepler and the English physician Robert Fludd.
Kepler, the giant of the scientific
The
revolution.
very same. Both Kepler and Fludd, interestingly, subscribed to that old occult idea of the microcosm and macrocosm, the human body, mirroring the universe, governed by the same principles.
So Pauli was interested in these older, more connected views of mind and matter.
Deeply. And his conviction wasn't just theoretical, it was apparently reinforced by his own experiences, things that sounded an awful lot like poltergeist activity around him.
Pauly himself had poltergeist experiences.
He believed so, yes. He felt these strange events, often involving malfunctioning equipment, correlated with his own periods of mental crisis and emotional conflict.
Which leads us to the Pauly effect.
Exactly. It's still a bit of a running joke among some physicists today. Pauly had this notorious reputation.
Don't let him near the lab.
Pretty much. Electronic equipment just seemed to go haywire or break down when he was nearby. There are famous anecdotes like Otto Stern supposedly banning him from his lab in Hamburg for that very reason.
Wow.
And another one, very poltergeist-like. In 1948, apparently a china vase inexplicably fell and smashed the very moment Pauly walked into the Jung Institute in Zurich.
Seriously?
That's the story. These incidents and others were things he discussed in his extensive letters with Jung. He saw them as connected to his inner state, fitting that synchronicity or mind-matter interaction idea.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So looking back over this whole deep dive, from Robert Boyle way back in the 17th century, right up to Jung and Pauly in the mid-20th, belief, or at least serious investigation, of poltergeist-type phenomena never really went away in science, did it?
It certainly endured within significant parts of the scientific community, yeah. But the crucial thing, as we've seen, is how the interpretations changed so dramatically over time.
Right. It shifted from, spirits and demons,
To perhaps unknown physical forces or laws, like with Richer.
and then landing squarely in the realm of psychology, the unconscious mind, even psychosomatics, with people like Schrenk-Notzing, Winterstein, and initially Jung.
Exactly. The phenomena remained puzzling, but the framework for trying to understand them evolved massively.
So a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Well, if you connect this to the bigger picture, it's really quite fascinating, isn't it? That figures like Jung and Pauly, these 20th century pioneers, actually saw themselves as, in a way, continuing an intellectual lineage.
A lineage back to
Back to people like Johannes Kepler giants of the scientific revolution. Figures most of us assume basically put an end to all that magic and occult stuff.
Yeah.
It really makes you question our neat stories about how science progresses and what it leaves behind.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
It challenges the straightforward narrative we often get taught. A really provocative thought to end on. And with that, we conclude this final deep dive into the unexpected scientific minds behind poltergeists. Now, if you want to explore this further and check out the academic references that Dr. Sommer based his research for Forbidden Histories on, you can find a link to the website right there in the description box. Thanks so much for joining us on the deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.
Until next time.